If one sentence in the autobiography captures him more truthfully than any simple notion of good versus evil, it's this one. In 1970, my father discovered a new crater on the moon. It's called Cooper's Crater, and you can just see it on the edge of the dark side's shadow. The moon as we know it is almost always partially illuminated, but every month we get a new moon where the light disappears from our sight. In the days around it, all that remains is a faint outline in the dark, lit only by Earth's reflection. And then, inevitably, the light returns. It is a perpetual loop of vanishing and reappearing caught in a cycle, neither fully illuminated nor completely consumed by the shadow. And that endless, exhausting orbit is Dale Cooper. The reason I love the autobiography, and honestly the same reason why I love The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, is that what we see in the show is just a portion of what makes Dale Dale. The autobiography covers 22 years of his life, and it begins on Christmas Day 1967, when 13-year-old Dale receives a tape recorder as a gift, and ends the day he arrives in Twin Peaks. Now, between those 2 points is the story of a man whose profound empathy made him a target. Every time he opened himself up to someone, every time he tried to save someone and failed, something evil responded, and it's as if the darkness that had been following him since childhood did not want to destroy him so much as it wanted to claim him. And perhaps it is no coincidence that the autobiography ends with him headed to a town that seems to sit on the exact boundary he had been navigating his entire life. Hey everyone, I'm Nikanak, and I make videos about everything I question and overthink, and today, that is Dale Cooper. So without further ado, let's get into it. When we start the book, Dale Cooper is, as any 13-year-old, steadfast in his beliefs. When a young man comes to Cooper's Quaker school seeking refuge from the Vietnam draft, every other child rallies around him. Dale, however, does not. He thinks that things will go very badly for the man because he was breaking the law, which is always supposed to be right. And while I cannot really blame a 13-year-old for not understanding the gravity of the situation, just to paint a picture, at 13, Dale possesses a cookie-cutter worldview where good and the law are synonymous, and anything outside that equation does not compute. And his role model for these beliefs is none other than Sherlock Holmes. Around the same time, he records finishing The Hound of Baskerville and declares Sherlock Holmes is the smartest detective who ever lived, someone whose life he would very much like to emulate. And while his school believes the best thing one can do is to do good rather than do well, in Sherlock Holmes, 13-year-old Cooper sees a way to do both. Now, while this is a very hopeful aspiration, it will soon prove otherwise. Now, you might be wondering, aside from Arthur Conan Doyle's influence, what were his parents like, right? Because it takes more than just a fictional character. Well, the household that produced this worldview is, at first glance, a warm one. Dale's mother loves him. His father, given his background, which I will get to in a minute, is present and attentive. And Coop, by any reasonable measure, is a child who feels seen and, more importantly, loved. Now, Leo Tolstoy famously wrote that each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. But for the Coopers, the uniqueness of their household lay not in unhappiness, but in the uncanny inheritance passed down through his mother's side, serving as a permanent tether to the supernatural forces pursuing him. She was haunted by recurring dreams she could never quite explain. Over and over, she dreamed of standing in an empty field while thousands of birds blocked out the sky. And she would go on and tell Dale that in dreams, we see things that the waking world hides. And whenever he would ask for answers, she would just brush it off, I believe desperate to shield him. However, that idea failed because in December of 1968, Cooper began having his own dreams. A stranger he had never met was trying to break into his room, screaming his name and clawing at the door. When Cooper told his mother, she revealed that she was having the exact same nightmare. And the only thing she gave him about this dream, about this door, about this man, is an ironclad warning to never let the man inside. Yet, if his mother tethered Dale to an inescapable supernatural dread, his father anchored him to reality. Dale's father is a World War II veteran, still extremely troubled by the violence and betrayal he witnessed. He is a man of few words, but there is one instance on a train back home after they visited the FBI headquarters together where he finally opens up to Dale. He tells his son about a village in France where his unit killed a farmer based on false information. The townspeople claimed the man was a collaborator. In reality, he just owed the people money. The unit went to investigate and they ended up sharing cheese and wine line, they met his wife, they met his 2 daughters before one of the soldiers shot him dead. And for obvious reasons, Dale's father never truly let go of that memory. The importance of this story for us, the readers, is that we finally learn a bit more about Dale's father, but it was also supposed to teach Dale, who was wearing rose-colored glasses for the FBI and the law, that good men can do evil things with the complete conviction that they are right, and that the only real option available is to make up your own mind. Which I believe is a great lesson for everyone. Now that disillusionment extended to his fate too. His father is irreligious. He's not an atheist exactly, but more like a man who tried the church, the Catholic Church, at some point and found it had nothing for him. We are never told why or when this happened, but given everything we know about what he brought home from the war, we can kind of piece it together. But despite that background of his household, Dale simply can't help his curiosity. He wants to understand the things that his parents can't or won't explain. And so, during a late-night asthma attack, he records a simple and curious thought. He says, "I have never seen a dead person. I think I would like to." And at first, I didn't give this much thought. It seemed to be like any childish curiosity grasping at concepts that are currently abstract to them. But then, as I continued to read, it felt like this one entry was the start of a bizarre and recurring pattern for Dale Cooper. He curiously asked to see Death, so Death took him up on it and followed him everywhere. Within just months of this entry, though Dale was unaffected personally, he experienced his first death. His friend Tom's brother comes home from the Vietnam War in a casket. Shortly after that, his grandmother has a stroke in the kitchen while making a cherry pie, and Dale is the one who finds her. Dale does not give us much more than a few facts of what he saw, but I think his grandmother's death affected him deeply, and I also think this is where the cherry pie gimmick in the show stops being a quirk. Cooper tries cherry pie and pie in general everywhere he goes for the rest of his life because he is looking for, I believe, the taste of his grandmother's kitchen, that sense of home he is about to lose and will spend the next 20 years trying to find. So when he finds Norma's pie in Twin Peaks and declares it the best he has ever had, beyond it just being a good cherry pie, I think it is a sign that this must be the place. Now, just a year later, his mother dies from a brain aneurysm. And while losing his grandmother, I think, cost him that home-cooked meal, the taste of something warm and safe, losing his mother cost him the home itself, with his father, just a couple of years after this, selling the house that he grew up in. Now, if his mother's and grandmother's deaths shattered his sense of home as a place, then losing Marie, who is Dale's neighbor, is what takes away his sense of safety with people, and she is also the first of what he will later call his signposts, locking any pattern he will repeat forever. A girl dies, and he's just too late to save her. Now, when she drowns at 17, it leaves him with this massive guilt over not being there and breaks his belief that goodness survives in this world. I also believe that Marie serves as a thematic precursor to Laura Palmer, mainly in how they were both exposed to drugs at a very young age and both trying to escape something. It's as if the universe is teaching Dale about the cases he will eventually be drawn to, but he doesn't understand this just yet. And the only thing he does know, he says, is that I do not believe in anything anymore, and that I must find something to believe in or I will cease to be. So in 1970, Dale sets out to find his purpose. He boards a bus out of Philadelphia and isn't seen again for 3 years. Now, we never find out what those 3 years encompass. He sends just 3 vague letters home, one sent each January 1st from 1971 to 1973. By the end of that 3rd year, he had finally stopped looking and returned home. Now, when he returns on his 19th birthday, the only account he offers of what happened is this: the whole universe is one bright pearl, and there is no need to understand it. But I think this bright pearl philosophy is less of an answer and more of a salve. And what I mean by this, it gave him enough peace of mind to keep moving, but it couldn't change what he is, a person whose profound openness makes him a permanent target for the dark. For instance, the FBI, which he had been building towards since the age of 13, is something he now approaches with ambivalence. So instead, he enrolls in college and gets a job for the summer digging holes for trees. While working this job, Dale meets Jim, a lonely man he presumes is an ex-convict. One evening, Jim invites Cooper to his apartment where Dale discovers he has spent 20 years writing his memoir, desperate for just one person to remember he existed. He shares it with him and then Cooper leaves. Not long after, Jim vanishes and his apartment burns to the ground. When Dale goes back to Jim's apartment, all he finds is the echo of mocking laughter in an alley and a freshly sharpened pencil on the ground. Now, there are two interpretations I have for this entry. One of them will be part of a theory that I will continue to explore throughout this video. But the first one is that the entity, the man from his dreams, I believe they are the same, destroyed Jim deliberately to show Dale that no matter how hard he tries to hold on to people, this darkness can erase them in the blink of an eye. The second is a bit unhinged, but what if the darkness did not act on Jim from the outside, but through Cooper like it does through Leland? I know, this sounds ridiculous, but thankfully for my theory, this isn't the only piece of evidence. I will get to that in a second. Now, another detail before we move on that I do want to mention is how eager Cooper is to trust Jim and learn from him after knowing him for just 8 days. He doesn't even know this man's last name or what he actually did before this job, yet he says he has a lot to learn from him. And while I don't know how dangerous Jim actually is, or rather was, but it's interesting that Cooper seems to gravitate towards these types of people like Windom Earl, right, who was batshit crazy, and seeking them mentors. Now, after Jim's disappearance, Dale's father wants to take a trip with him before he goes off to college. So they go, and once back, what follows at college is a series of desperate misses at love and connection. Dale gets very drunk for what appears to be the first time. He meets a woman whose name he cannot later remember. He finds instead a red-haired, blue-eyed woman named Andy, and the night they spend together ends with the two of them in a shallow body of water. The next day, Andy leaves for Holland to study construction and mentions on her way out that she is meeting her husband at the airport. And after hearing this, Dale cannot make sense of the connection they had or why it disappeared as quickly as it came. So he goes back to his bright pearl philosophy. Unfortunately, that also falls short because he is unable to forget Andy. So he travels home to his dad, and while back home, he meets up with his friend Howard, who tells Dale he should find a one-night stand. Dale isn't really into this idea, so he goes back to his dorm. On his way back home, he begins tracking what he believes is a predator. He follows the figure, he loses it, and then within 2 minutes of turning back, he finds a body. She is face down, partially clothed, multiple stab wounds across most of her torso, and her face badly beaten. Now, this is where my theory comes back, because he says he follows a predator, loses sight of it, turns around, and finds a body. And unlike Jim, where the darkness allegedly may have used him, here I think maybe Dale was actually triggered by Andy's rejection. Now, in this part of the autobiography, honestly, no, that's not true. Throughout the whole autobiography, throughout this whole book, Dale has been searching for this connection, like really actively searching for this, even desperately to some extent. And here he seems to have found it, but then it just disappeared overnight. And so what if that cracked something open? What if the predator he saw ahead of him was a projection of himself? He lost sight of the hallucination because it was not real, turned around to go home, and stumbled upon the body he had actually left behind. Just as an FYI, I am not definitively saying Cooper killed this girl, and I'm not saying he was possessed and killed Jim. All I'm saying is that the autobiography seems to be very careful about what it leaves out. And you might be thinking, well, this is enough with the nonsense. I've heard this enough, Nika. You're talking crazy. Nay. Because what's interesting is that the aftermath and some events that follow this only deepen my suspicion. After the discovery of this body, Cooper's nightmares intensify. He records that he fears he is losing his mind, and eventually a friend finds him screaming at imaginary demons, delirious with a fever, and he wakes up 2 days later in the hospital with no memory of how he got there. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, this feels like it could be guilt, that he could see in his dreams what had actually happened. Now, this whole incident left Cooper, at least for some time, terrified of his own mind, so he ends up taking an internship at the county hospital, and he decides to study average people who have gone mad. And he explains this by saying that the things worth studying are the ones that terrify and confound you most. There he meets Betty, a 19-year-old patient convinced she is possessed by the devil. Dale finds interest in her and ultimately gains her trust. Now, after this happens, there's this one moment where she looks right through him and says that Dale is an avenging angel who will destroy her. Now Betty, while she might be ill, I think she correctly points to a shadow in Dale that he just isn't ready to face yet. And if my theory is correct, that the darkness is already inside him, then everything that happens next when he joins the FBI and starts working for the FBI starts to make a lot more sense. By June 1977, Dale joins the Bureau and solves his very first case, rescuing a kidnapped girl chained to a tree and putting the monsters behind bars. But for Dale, this case wasn't a win, and it certainly wasn't closed. He records that he feels completely empty. He thought saving this little girl would give him this massive wave of satisfaction, but instead he's stuck with the reality that catching the bad guy doesn't undo the damage, and the trauma created by this incident is now this girl's to carry, and no arrest changes that. His second case gets even worse. 3 dead women, and Dale instantly senses that whatever did this wasn't entirely human. During this case, he also meets Albert Rosenfield. At first, Cooper is baffled by how angry Albert is all the time, and honestly, when watching the show, so was I. But what Dale and I eventually realize is that Albert's rage and Cooper's emptiness after his first case are the exact same coping mechanisms, just shown differently, because neither can accept what humans are capable of doing to one another. And then comes Windom Earle. When Earle arrives at the Pittsburgh office in the spring of 1978, he presents himself as the answer to Cooper's existential drift. And Windom is everything the Bureau promised to be: brilliant, attentive, and deeply invested in Cooper's development. And for a young man like Dale, who is desperate for a mentor, Earle perfectly fits into that role. So when Dale takes his first life, something his father had no words for because he understands that his son had crossed a bridge of no return, it is Windom who shows up for Dale and invites him for dinner and chess. Now during that visit, Cooper meets Windom's wife, Caroline, who tells him about the first time her husband was forced to use his weapon and says she hopes it will not affect Cooper's life the way it affected Windom's. And I do wonder, after rereading this entry, if Caroline actually knew how prophetic that warning would be, because what follows immediately after this visit is Windom's descent into the abyss. He vanishes, he sends Dale on a wild goose chase, and 3 days later, he resurfaces. Now, after reading these entries, I couldn't shake the feeling that Windom had brought something dark with him. But then I would think maybe he didn't bring anything back at all. Maybe, like Caroline said, that darkness was already there after his first kill, and he was either too weak to resist it or enjoyed it far too much. Now, the book never gave me a definitive answer to my question, but it does suggest that whatever Windom found in the abyss, be it something deep down within himself or an evil supernatural entity, once again came back with him. So from this moment on, every interaction Windom and Dale had, every moment they share here, and every move Earle makes in the future has to be reevaluated, because we simply don't know who or what is actually sitting across from Cooper. And looking back at Cooper's crater with all of this in mind, what if Windom recognized the same darkness already lurking inside Cooper, and the only reason he ever came back to the Pittsburgh office was to pull Dale into the dark? Hopefully, I will get my answer soon, either by the end of season 2 or Fire Walk With Me, or even in the return. Nevertheless, following this ordeal, Gordon Cole sends Dale on a mandatory leave. Workaholic that he is, Cooper doesn't know what to do with himself, so he takes the Earl's advice to visit their old honeymoon resort, while also seeking out Windom's former chess master. But upon arrival, the old man takes one look at Cooper and simply says, "There is death in your face, I can teach you nothing." The next morning, Cooper wakes up to find a bloody chicken carcass nailed to his door. He goes to find the old man to ask, well, what does all of this mean, only to discover that the old man had committed suicide. On the table beside him is a note that says, "May God stop him." So, 3 times now, the autobiography has left a gap in Cooper's account at exactly the moment when something irreversible happened. Jim's room burns down shortly after Cooper walks out. A woman is found dead not even minutes, maybe like seconds even, after Cooper loses sight of a figure in the dark. And now, an old man is found dead the morning after looking into Cooper's face and seeing death. The obvious interpretation is that the old man was driven to suicide by fear. But what if, just like with the girl, Cooper did not just stumble upon the body? With the girl, if my theory is true, then the trigger was Andy's rejection and all the rejections that came before her. And here, I think it's the same. The old man looked at Cooper, saw death, and refused him. And if rejection cracked something open before, well, maybe it did it again. But that is it for this particular theory that I have about Dale. I mean, I don't even know if you can call it a theory. It's more like questions to the veteran viewers. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, because I don't know, it just seems strange. And maybe this is a trap. Maybe the book wants me to feel this way to then, in the show, prove otherwise. I don't know. Let me know. But let's continue. Now, immediately after this situation, Dale records very strange and fragmented entries of darkness, and when he wakes up 20 hours later, he understands that he has been drugged and has no memory of the events that had happened, and only a feeling that a terrible disaster has happened back at home. And he is absolutely right. Caroline has been kidnapped, and to my surprise, this turns out to be all Windom's doing. During the search for Caroline, Cooper hypnotizes Windom, only for him to completely break character, laughing that he wasn't a victim of the dark, but chosen by it, and that Caroline saw the evil in him all along. And when they finally find her, drugged, traumatized, and unable to recognize her own husband, Windom intentionally steps back, handing her straight into Cooper's care and leading them to fall in love with each other. And before we continue, I do want to mention that I don't think Cooper actually fell in love with Caroline and vice versa. What I think happened is that Windom left his wife with the one man who still saw him as a mentor, deliberately creating a situation designed to exploit Cooper's biggest blind spot, his empathy, and by extension, his compulsion to save people. And inevitably that led to him falling victim to the Florence Nightingale effect, where the caregiver develops feelings for the person they are trying to save. And Windom knew him well enough to know that Cooper simply wouldn't be able to turn away. Which brings us to May 1st. Caroline suddenly screams as she remembers her captor's face. By 1 a.m., Cooper notes in his journal that something feels deeply wrong. The very next entry is recorded from a hospital bed. Cooper has been stabbed, Caroline is dead, and Windom is the one who found them. Now, after this happened, Dale is left completely broken, and probably Windom predicted this, but he is taking full responsibility for failing to protect Caroline, recording heal and please, desperate for this darkness to finally stop following him, before he disappears for 6 months. Now, after his 6-month hiatus, Cooper returns to active duty and is assigned to counterintelligence for 6 years, keeping his hands clean and head clear simply because the job doesn't involve murder scenes. But we know, of course, that isn't the case, because this quiet and somewhat peaceful time is shattered by a storm named Windom Earl. He starts sending taunting letters and poems to Dale, acting as his dark mirror, the Moriarty to Cooper's Sherlock Holmes, reminding him of what losing to the darkness looks like. Shortly after these letters, Gordon assigns Dale to the unsolved murder of 17-year-old Teresa Banks. After hitting a dead end, Cooper records a tape to Diane, realizing this malevolent force is something he has encountered 3 times before, including the night that Caroline had died. He also says that evil doesn't just exist outside of people. It's carried around in the soul like a serpent. It requires a host. He saw it take over Windom, and deep down, he spent years watching it try to take over him. Now, because the murder of Teresa Banks is left unsolved, Cooper returns to San Francisco, but he can't stop inviting danger, because he tells Diane he wants a case that will push him to the absolute edge, forgetting his lifelong pattern where every time he demands to understand death and evil, the universe delivers it. And he finishes this entry by saying, "Be careful what you wish for, you might just get it." And then 4 days later, he is sent to Twin Peaks. So who are you really, Dale Cooper? After 22 years of recordings, after everything the autobiography puts him through, I think the answer is both simpler and more uncomfortable than the show lets on. He wants to desperately be Sherlock Holmes. That much the autobiography makes clear. He wants the relationship with truth that Holmes has, the ability to walk into a room, read what happened, name the evil, and walk back out without being changed by it. He wants justice to be a solvable question. He wants good and evil to be as identifiable as they were when he was 13 years old and a young man came to his school seeking refuge. But Special Agent Dale Cooper is not Sherlock Holmes. Although both are fictional characters and both are brilliant in their own way, he just can never be, because Sherlock does not feel the weight of what he investigates the way Cooper does. Holmes survives the darkness by quite literally suppressing it. Cooper can't do that. He opens himself completely to every person he encounters, to Jem and his 20 years of remembrances, to Betty and her conviction that she is possessed, to Caroline and the love he could not prevent himself from feeling, to Teresa Banks and the evil he recognizes in her death because he has felt it before. And of course, Marie. His empathy, I believe, is his greatest gift and his greatest vulnerability, because every time he opens himself up to the dark, something responds to him, keeping him perpetually trapped on the edge of the dark side shadow. I don't think Scott Frost put that detail in the autobiography by accident. It is the best description of Special Agent Dale Cooper, a man on the boundary of good and bad, close enough to both to understand them, and far enough from either to never quite belong to one side completely. Windom Earle, however, is what happens when the boundary tips. Windom did not choose Cooper randomly, I believe, and he had recognized in Dale the same boundary he himself had always walked. And Twin Peaks, I believe, is where all of this converges. As I said in my Twin Peaks tapes video, Cooper was called there. The case found him rather than him finding it. And whatever exists in Twin Peaks, on that boundary between the woods and the town, between the living and whatever lives in the dark, it calls specifically for the man on the edge of the dark side shadow. And the battle that has been building up since a 13-year-old boy asked to see death and the universe took him up on it, that battle is just getting started, because perhaps it's no coincidence. But what about you? Do you agree or disagree with my read of the novel? Do you have your own reading? I want to hear it all, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you're still here, well, thank you so much for watching. And now remember, the important thing is to always keep questioning, even me. Till next time, bye!